So this video lesson is all about the definition of angles, the way that we notate angles, both when we're drawing them on a plane and also when we're just writing them separate from a plane, and also goes through the different types of angles that we might come across. But first, let's go through a way that you might have seen angles before. One of the familiar ways that's talked about with angles is that what happens when two rays that are not the exact same, that is, they're not facing in the exact same direction, share an endpoint. And the important part about that definition is that the angle is made up of the space between the two rays. So this entire location here that's being filled in yellow, that is the angle. So first go ahead and pause the video and write down these two parts. There'll be one more piece to add to this in a second, but this is one way of talking about angles. Pause the video and come back when you are ready to move on. So in this definition, we need two rays that are going in completely different directions. The angle is the space between, which is one reason why what we call an angle mark is often done as connecting the two rays using this little curved semicircular bit there. Not a full semicircle, but a little piece of a circle. And that is what, at least in class, I will call an angle mark. One of the things that's true about angles is that it has a point where these two rays meet. That point is called a vertex, and is defined as the point where the two rays of an angle intersect. So go ahead, pause the video, write that definition down, and unpause when you are ready to move on. So if we remember back to the definition of ray, when we talked about a ray, we had to have 2 points. So for example, point B, where the ray starts, and point A. So we could notate that ray as BA. And so if we did that with the other ray too, for example, we would have this ray that also starts at B but goes through point C, and we'd have ray BC. So these would be the two rays that make up this angle. They have to share an endpoint, which is why their first letter is the same. But those are still how we would write those two rays. So when it comes to an angle, we need 3 points. We need that point, for example, AB for the one ray, and those points BC for the other one. And so when we write an angle down, we're going to use the angle notation, which looks a little bit like a less than sign, but this bottom part of the line here is actually horizontal. And then we just start at one of the points on the rays, but not at the vertex, and we imagine traveling around the angle. So if we're starting at A, to go around the angle, we would go from A to B to C. And so we're going to notate that as angle ABC. It's important that the center letter here is the vertex. Now we could also, for those of you who are looking at this and saying, hold on, wait a second, we can start at C and actually go around the angle that way. You're absolutely right. So we could also label this angle CBA. Still, the vertex, B, is that center letter there. And so that is how we notate angles when we're writing them either on the plane, if we wanted to give it an official name, or when we're writing it off the plane when we're talking about something else. So go ahead and copy this angle down, as well as its 2 possible angle names. And if you want to remind yourself that the middle point has to be the vertex, that B, you can go ahead and do that too, but pause the video and come back when you are ready to move on. Alright, so take a second and see what you can do. See how you would imagine writing this angle down as a quick idea. Remember, you're starting on one of the rays and then moving around the angle when you look at actually naming it. So take a second to write the name of that angle down and come back when you're ready to move on. So in this one, we can start either at D and go around the angle from D to E to F, or we can start at F and move around the angle from F to E to D. Either is correct. Again, that center letter is the vertex. So another way that we're going to need to look at angles, an important definition, is that angles are what you get when you rotate a ray. So if we imagine taking this ray, that we can see that the angle is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, or the space is getting bigger and bigger and bigger between it. So this gives us what we call degrees. If we don't rotate the ray at all, we call it 0 degrees. And we go all the way around, And the number of degrees in an angle is determined by how far that ray is rotated. So go ahead, pause the video, write down this definition of an angle also, as well as the definition of degrees. There's a lot of writing things down, a lot of definitions here. All right, so with that idea of angles and the idea of degrees now, we have some special types of angles that you might have heard of before. One, if we rotate a ray all the way around, we call it a straight angle. It essentially forms a straight line. But if we, so that's starting at one point and rotating, so you imagine the ray is facing the opposite way. But if we rotate only a quarter of the way, or 90 degrees, we call it a right angle. And so the amount of rotation from one ray to another, or the space between the rays as we measure it in degrees, that is how we determine what type of an angle we have. So go ahead, write this, pause the video, write these down, draw the pictures to show the difference between a straight angle and a right angle. Important to include the vertex here, especially in the straight angle, otherwise it just looks like a line. So pause the video, write those down, and come back when you are ready to move on. So in dealing with angles that aren't right and aren't straight, we have a few different options here. Well, if the option that we have is that we're rotating our angle, and it's not quite all the way to 90 degrees, which is a quarter turn. That's one way we can do that. Or we can get to 90. We can continue past 90 and go anywhere between 90 and 180 degrees, which is a half turn. We can continue another 90 degrees to 270, which is all the way around here, which is essentially a 3/4 turn. Or we can turn all the way around and end up back where we started. We call that 360 degrees. Now it looks like 0, but this actually represents a turn all the way around. So if we have started at 0 and we haven't gone quite the entire distance to that quarter turn, we call it an acute angle. An angle with less than 90 degrees is called acute. So go ahead, pause the video, write this down, and move on when you are ready. Now we see acute angles in lots of different places. For example, when we look at the pyramids appear to be an acute angle, especially when we look at that angle right there. Pizzas, unless you're a fan of really big pizzas, which some people might be, often the point of a pizza is a 90-degree angle. We have things like doorstops that are, or not 90-degree angles, rather acute angles. We have doorstops that are acute angles, that very small angle made right there. These points of the stars are all made by acute angles, and even the Chrysler Building in New York, if we imagine it as a perfect triangle, would be an acute angle up at the top where the points meet up in that famous spire. Now we could go to 90 degrees, we could go beyond 90 degrees, but not quite to the point of a straight angle. And so something between a 90-degree angle and a straight angle, for instance, the one that I just drew in purple, these are called obtuse angles. So go ahead, pause the video, write down this definition, and come back when you are ready to move on. And finally, we can see obtuse angles in a lot of different places in the world too. The Pentagon, the building, is made of a bunch of obtuse angles. Stealth fighters actually have obtuse angles at the front of their planes. And then, sometimes we have sort of terraces and roofs being built. A lot of roofs end up at obtuse angles too. So I know this is a longer video, lots of different definitions, but important things talking about what angles are, how we notate them, and 2, or rather 4 of the most important types of angles.